So I'll just start off by introducing myself. So I'm Katie Pfeiffer, founder of Recalc, and my background, I started off my career in private equity. So I spent a lot of time on the investing side of the world and then have held various CFO roles at different high growth startups, and then started Recalc about 2 years ago to bring the training that I benefited from early in my career to a broader audience. I'll mention a few things towards the end of class in terms of the other training that we do. We spend a lot of time on spreadsheet training and finance training. I know we've seen some of you or your teams there in the past, and we're launching PowerPoint and SQL training as well. So super excited for today's topic. Today, we're going to spend all of our time talking about headcount forecasting. The reason this is near and dear to my heart is I think that this is one of those topics that falls in between teams in a company. So it's like partly HR leaders, it's partly finance leaders, and it's partly business unit leaders that end up owning or having responsibility for forecasting headcount. And I think a lot of times there can be miscommunication between those teams or frustration at the templates that we have to work with. So that's what we're going to focus on today. And I thought I would just maybe set the stage a little bit for the conversation around when I'm thinking about forecasting, and I'm definitely biased towards the finance perspective since that's the background I grew up with. I'm thinking about a few different things in terms of like, if we're successful at this forecast, what have we achieved, or how is it that we'll be able to go through the process? So towards that end, I'm just going to show one quick slide here to get us thinking about what do we need to consider when we consider forecasting. I would love for this class to be more of a conversation. So I'd also, once I sort of share the things that are top of mind from my perspective, love to hear the thoughts of folks in the room. What are some of your frustration points? What are some of the things that you maybe, inspired you to join today's call? And then what we'll do is we'll spend time looking at a few different templates that we've put together that are hopefully going to make things easier on the next time that you're working on this type of activity. So the first thing that I'm always thinking about is, okay, if we go through and we build this forecast, we fill out the template or we work with teams and put something together, is it actually going to translate into anything in the business? So are we actually going to use it to manage our headcount? And I've seen all sorts of things on this front, but what I've kind of come to the conclusion on is at some level, we have to drill down to the team and even beyond the team to the roles. So if I'm a team leader, I'm going to be a lot more inclined to use a forecast if I know, hey, I have these roles, or at least these buckets of roles or levels over time. And so one of the templates we're going to use is really at that person level. Now, huge organizations, we can't always forecast down to that level of granularity if we're on a tight timeline, but I think at some level, rolling down to that level of granularity ends up being helpful. And so we can actually know, okay, where are we against plan? Another big thing that I saw, especially sitting in a finance seat, is, hey, does this plan make sense in the context of historical information? So one of the painful processes that can happen is, hey, we have all of our information in some payroll system, whether that's Gusto or ADP or whatever that may be, and we go to export that information and start our planning process. And first of all, there can just be pain around that, or maybe it's in Workday, like pain around, okay, who's on what teams? How does that data get divvied up? There isn't a magical solution to that, although I do think having people on your team that have can easily manipulate that data in Excel or relabel it, rework it is helpful. But basically, whatever forecast I see, particularly in a finance leadership seat, I want to see, okay, we're starting with this many, then we're making these changes. It's going up or down from there. If I don't have a starting point to compare to, I don't really know if it ties back to anything real. And sometimes that's actually, even though that sounds simple, a little harder in practice than maybe it feels like it should be. So those are the first two things I think about. The next thing I would say is, can we translate that headcount into cost? So all the templates we're going to look at today have both headcount and salary data, as well as this concept of fringe. So if you are paying for, benefits and then payroll tax, right now in the templates we've given, we'll talk about today, it's just as a overall percentage. That's wildly simplifying. I'll talk a little bit about how to get to a greater level of detail if desired, depends on what level you're forecasting at. I do see some organizations that aren't really ready to forecast, at that cost level day one. So they've really focused on headcount, but I think partnering with finance to eventually get that into cost and then make sure that cost makes sense in the context of the overall business plan, the revenue forecast business plan ends up being really important. Again, I'm of course biased from the finance perspective. And then, is it clear and easy to follow? Is it easy to update? So a lot of the focus of the templates today is trying to make something that's easy to update, hopefully somewhat hard to break. In Excel, it's easy to build stuff, but it's also easy to break stuff. And we'll also talk about how to check your work to make sure it's not broken. And then I think this is one of those classic topics that falls in the gray zone between different teams. And so who owns what? And that's going to be different in every organization, but trying to make that a more explicit conversation as you go through the process, I think ends up being really important. So those are a couple of the things that jumped to the top of my mind as we were putting these templates together. Okay. We're going to see two different templates, and then I'm also going to show you how we built at least part of one of them. So we're not going to trace through every single cell, but make sure you can walk away knowing how to use them, and also a little bit of how we went about building the first one so that we've got a little bit for everyone. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you guys can all see that. And I'm going to start off just sharing or walking through at a high level some of these templates. So the first template, the goal here is basically, and I think about building out these forecasts as two layers, maybe. Layer number one is let's get all the base information in one place. Layer number two is how do we summarize that so other people can understand what we're looking at quickly. Somebody doesn't need to know all of the last level of detail in here if they just want to see, okay, let's step back and look at the overall summary. So each of these templates has a detailed level and a summary level. And the first one we're going to look at is what I would call by person as opposed to by team, which will be the next one. So here we're forecasting at the actual person level. I would say that this kind of template is most helpful when you have either a small organization, so call it sub 200 people, and relatively static teams. You don't go wildly up or down to staff like one project and then destaff, that kind of thing. So these are more like biased towards full-time employment. And it can also be really useful in a large organization if you're trying to do a divisional, like a subset, a business unit or division type team that will ultimately roll up to a bigger forecast. And I've used a template like this in the past because I've been able to sit as the finance person with my HR counterpart and my business unit counterpart and say, okay, let's go through and actually discuss and develop the particular plan. So for example, I'm sitting there talking to the sales team. I will group and not show anything else on the spreadsheet. Nobody should see stuff for teams they're not part of. And then I'm sitting with the sales leader saying, okay, how are we building out our team? Who are the new hires? When are they going to come on board? So let's talk a little bit about how the template works. Essentially, we've got instructions up here at the top. I'm going to collapse this for a second as I voice things over. And everything in yellow basically means this is something you can play with directly, and everything else should flow off of that. We have everything organized by team. So if you type a different team name here, it's going to change everything that's below that in the yellow section to the next white. And at the bottom, there's some additional space if you want to add more teams. Within a given team, we can put it, however many people we want. If you actually start using this template and you find it doesn't have enough space for what you want to do, just let us know. We can help you update it so that it's a quick and easy process if there's not enough space in the template we've developed. Now, what we have here is we basically have by team, who are the people that are already on the team. These are all tagged existing, okay, which is different from if somebody's a planned hire, which will be new. The existing people, or rather all the people can also optionally be tagged with a category. You could imagine doing as many categories as you want. This example one is executive manager and individual contributor, so that we can summarize basically anytime we tag our data, that's going to let us summarize our data by those tags much more easily. And then we've got current salary if they're an existing member of the team. This is basically assumed that we're here at the end of 2022 and we're trying to forecast 2023 on a calendar year basis. And so we've got everybody's current salary, and then we have whatever their go forward salary is going to be. Now, the way that the go forward salary works, just so we have something that's very easy to use, is that it basically says, okay, if they're already on the team, let's take their old salary and then give them this amount of salary increase. All of this in our template is currently flowing off of one number, 10%, but you could easily overwrite any of it. So I could say that they are actually getting a 5% raise and everything updates. So we have a choice. You can either update up here or update on the side. And then when we get down to new team members, basically to add any new team members to the template, you simply say new, put whatever it is you're anticipating hiring, and then put the expected compensation. The last piece is to put the expected start date. And so once we have this information in here, all of this is flowing into a monthly forecast. For the existing folks, we have their salary monthly, so divided by 12. And this initial level of the forecast is just worrying about salary costs. Okay, we'll also see headcount down below, and we'll also see with fringe. So this is forecasting salary, and then it of course incorporates their raise. The mechanics here, so it's basically saying if they're an existing team member or if they're new, so like let's say we're looking here, basically they're either an existing team member or the date in question where they're starting is less than or equal to the date above, meaning they have started, then they'll flow in. So we see this new person starts in March, we start seeing their salary flow through in March. This is a simplified template, so if they're in that month or in the entire month, could get a little fancier if you wanted partial months, but we've decided to keep it relatively simple here in terms of people start essentially on the first of the month. So this is going to roll into our monthly forecast. And this is what I would call the most like granular level. So by person, by month. Any questions on this phase of the forecast? Okay. All right. So we've got a template of by person feeding into by month. And then I think the question from there is, how do we actually summarize this? So essentially, the rule of thumb in Excel is always going to be if you tag your data, you can summarize by it. And so here we're pulling our entire team list. For those of you who have come to some of our Excel training, there are some super useful formulas in both Excel and Sheets that we can use to make this easier and also a little bit dynamic. We're essentially filtering our data to see what is not like a blank, because I just didn't want those blanks coming in here. And then taking the unique values. Anytime you want one of each thing in a list, you can use unique. So we get the unique team names, and then we're calculating all of their salaries. How do we calculate the salaries? That's simply a sum ifs. So basically, we're adding up the salary data above. So this salary data, so long as the tag on our data is that team name. And that's as simple as that. So we're summing up everything by team. This is still by team by month. I will spend some time at this level, but we also have a more summary level on the next tab. So I'm rolling up the salaries. I am then going to roll up the salaries with fringe. So this is the first time that we're sort of considering fringe. And if I'm going to consider the total cost to employ this team, I definitely at least at a high level need to think about the cost of payroll tax and healthcare. Now, I would say this is relatively oversimplified, but good for first pass of a forecast, which is to say, okay, ask the finance team, okay, what have we been experiencing in terms of a fringe percentage of salaries? So what is our additional cost? And finance should be able to answer that. I would say where you might want to double click and go a level deeper is if you have people at very different pay bands, fringe can be quite different amounts. For example, if you have people that are maybe like working in a call center, making hourly comp, but opting into healthcare could be a much more sizable percentage of their salary than somebody who's an engineer sitting on your team who also opted into healthcare. So it's possible that you would want to consider fringe at a team level or a salary band level or, a category level. And that's not built into this template. If that's something you want to build into it, we'd be happy to help you do that. There's always going to be trade-offs in any template between sort of specificity and simplicity, or like flexibility and simplicity. So we've taken a slightly more simple approach. So this fringe basically just adds, it's essentially a 15% adder on whatever their salary was. Okay. And then last but not least, we have headcount and change in headcount. So headcount here, if you're curious about the Excel, is essentially a countifs. So we're saying, okay, let's count up however many people here are greater than 0, basically however many lines here are greater than 0, and make sure that it's on the right team. Okay, so that's all we're doing there. Count that it's greater than 0 and count that it's the right team. And that tells us how many people are in each team by month. Finally, we take the change in headcount period over period to see when we are adding folks. So we're adding one person in marketing, one person in sales, et cetera. Another simplification here, this does not consider commissions. So if you have a more variable comp structure that's not in here, all this is doing is basically your expected on target earnings. The other simplification is that this is what I would consider a gap forecast, meaning if you are accruing, this is not to get too technical on the finance side, but if you're accruing cost throughout the year. So let's say ultimately, my whole expected comp, my on target earnings. So if I do my job and I hit my bonus, I'm going to make, let's say, 120,000. So that's, call it 10K a month. The GAAP way of showing that would be 10K a month. The cash out the door, though, might be that I'm making 8K a month, and then I'm making up the delta at the end of the year as a bonus. Okay. You could forecast in either way, and that's where alignment with the finance team ends up being really important. Personally, I think the simpler approach is to take what do we expect folks to make all in. So like, let's say that was the 120K all in, forecast like that. And then sit with the finance team and say, look, 20% of people's comp or 50% or whatever the percentage is actually a bonus. So if you're trying to forecast cash, which somebody on the finance team will be doing, then you could pull out 20% of the comp each month and push that into a bonus at the end of the year. But to me, that's really a finance activity. That's not a team planning activity. At the collaboration between HR and business unit side, I would focus on what do we think their total comp will be, spread it like that, and then let finance make the cash adjustments in their cash flow forecast. So let's go to summary for this template. So this template, we saw how we build it on the other page. We now want to say, okay, let's get ourselves ready for cross-functional conversations that are out of the weeds and more like this. So does this make sense, right? Before we go back and iterate further, or maybe this is, we're ready to kind of publish at whatever the highest level of the org is. Here we've got monthly on the left and quarterly on the right. Okay. And the monthly on the left is the same as what we saw on the other page. It's just pulling that in from the other page. Now, one kind of cool feature is you can put this team list in any order that you want, because the template essentially looks up based on the team. So if you said, hey, I really want to put HR here and then finance here, everything updates. And as long as your check line is checking out, you're good to go. Okay, I'll undo that. But basically you can reorder, and I would suggest potentially ordering by size. You could also do a sorted version of this. That said, sometimes people like looking at certain teams first, like the executive team or sales team or whatever that may be. And then we've got the quarterly sum. The other thing I would say that most, I would maybe like boards and finance folks and CEOs are going to be concerned with is like, okay, where are we starting with and where are we getting to? So, okay, we started here, we got to here, but tell me what that really means. And from my perspective, a really useful metric is just a run rate metric. So where are we run rating to? If we continue with exactly where we are for a full year, what would that look like? And you can run rate any time period. It's just essentially annualizing it. But this run rate's December. So this says, okay, I've got December is 600K of comp. That basically run rates to 7.4 million. Notice we've also shown everything here in thousands of dollars. I think that's important. My suggestion is never to show numbers that have 2 commas in them. Always simplify to show no more than 1 comma. So if you have numbers that are in millions, I would suggest showing it in thousands or even in millions with 1 decimal place. If you have numbers in billions, I would suggest showing them in millions or something along those lines. So make sure that you don't have sort of too much data that it's hard to actually understand what you're looking at. And then make sure you make the math easy for folks to say, okay, at a more summary level, so at a quarterly level or at a run rate level, what are things looking like? The next section is the same information, just with fringe, again, looking up from the other page. Okay, so that's our summary. And then we go to summarizing headcount. So this headcount summary, this is going to be how many people we have on the team at each point in time. The run rate is, of course, just where we end the year. And then this is quarterly, how many people do we have and what is our net change? Okay. Next up is our ratios. So trying to put this in context. One of the things we have here, and eventually this would get rolled into an overall forecast. So this is not the end all be all, like this is not sitting here in a P&L format, but this is just trying to make it so that we can kind of put things in context. So one thing we can do is we can say, let's drop in a rough revenue forecast. Okay. And let's look at this in the context of our revenue. We could look at the overall cost in the context of revenue. So first of all, what is our revenue, our monthly revenue and annual revenue per person? A lot of times in many different industries, you'll have some kind of metric or best practice or standard for that. So are we doing well from a just total dollars of revenue per person. That's going to leverage any headcount forecast. And you don't actually even need to have any cost information. So if you've done your entire forecast at this point on a headcount basis only, you're still fine. Like that, you would be able to calculate these metrics. You can also do the same thing for just salespeople, for example, or really any team that you want. This is based on these labels. In general, I try to keep everything we build as dynamic as possible. If you want to look at this versus another team, you could just plug a different team name in here and then be able to see revenue per that team member. And then the other thing we're looking at is from more of a cost perspective. Let's look at, for example, how much we have in terms of overall salaries, cost-wise, with fringe divided by revenue, so as a percentage of revenue. And one thing people asked before the class was, how do I know like what my benchmark should be? Like, what does good look like? It's super hard to answer that on an overall basis because it, of course, varies by company, by industry, by stage that you're at. But I do think there are some useful resources out there, and it's about hunting them down for whatever, whatever industry you're in. So for example, if you're in tech, which I know many of you are, there's a website put out, I'll flip over to it for a second, by a firm called Meritech. They're like a Series B, C investor. And they basically compile all the public SaaS companies out there and just compile a bunch of metrics around them. A lot of it's around valuation. So how are they trading and things that investors care about, but some of them are actually key financial metrics. This is still pretty high level, but this is sales and marketing as a percentage of revenue. Now, some of these companies are spending a lot and they still are lighting money on fire. So maybe it's not the best benchmark, but if there are companies that you follow that you're like, okay, we're trying to build something kind of like what they're doing, you can actually see what these percentages are. And the way you navigate to this, and we'll send it out in the follow-up email as well, is you literally, if you just Google Meritech Capital and click in the upper right on benchmarking, it will bring up this entire data set. And you can look at sales and marketing, R&D, G&A, OpEx overall, and so on. And I think those are fairly useful to at least get some data points. This is all based on larger public companies, so it may not be the most comparable if you are operating in a much smaller business. They also have this comps table, which shows similar information here. You can scroll over and see for each company what some of these metrics look like. And you can also see if the company's actually making any money. If you're aspiring to be profitable and they're not profitable, it may not be the best benchmark. All right, so that's hopefully at least helpful for folks in SaaS. And again, as a caveat, this does not include commissions unless you had actually put commissions into the previous sheet. There are also ratios that we can do. This is wired up so that whatever team you pick here, it will calculate the ratio of how many people you have in that team to the overall number of people. Okay. So let's go to we're done with the first template. So when am I using the first template? I'm using the first template when I'm sitting there at the team level. And actually, sorry, I will show one other thing. This is kind of an overwhelming, likely large spreadsheet to some degree, although it's modular and hopefully easy to navigate. When I ultimately am done and ready to show this to other people, one trick, if you want to group and hide rows, is to use ones and zeros. 1 for what you want to show, 0 for what you want to hide. And you literally could just type in 1 and 0. Or you can make it more formulaic, like basically if there's a value here, then let's show it, okay? When I do that, so I've already done the ones and zeros for us to make this easier here. When I do that, I'm going to select that data, go to my data tab, filter out the zeros, and all of a sudden we have a spreadsheet that has exactly the data we want to see. This is actually a good trick in general in Excel. I use it all the time. So good to know, basically ones and zeros, and then throw a filter on there. So again, that was data, filter. We just throw a filter on that data, get rid of the zeros. Okay. And you could do the same thing on anywhere else in your data if you wanted to. Just for your reference, since I talked through all this, it's up here as instructions as well. So you can go step by step and use this template later. All right, sorry about that. Let's move to the next template. So the next template is, hey, I don't have time to deal with every single team by hand. I want to, or like at the person level, I want to forecast more at the how many people are on each team. And that's what this template's all about. So this template, our summary is essentially on the top here, but let's see how we get there. The way we want to do this, and this is going to really be driven mostly on number of people basis, and then we're going to use average salaries to calculate cost. So what we have is we have how many people did we have October, November, December on our team. Okay. And then we are building up this forecast by a month. Where does the forecast come from? The forecast comes from a combination of attrition and new hires. Okay. So attrition, we're basically saying we expect to lose some team members. This is also where you could update this throughout the year if you unexpectedly lose team members and you're not sure you're going to backfill them right away, or maybe you think you'll backfill them a couple months later. You could update the attrition and the new hires in here. It can be hard to forecast attrition at the team level, but you can use this to basically say, hey, we could look at our historical data. We know in general we have a few salespeople, especially in a bigger org, we have a few salespeople turning over, each quarter. Let's plug that in here. And it's as simple as basically plugging in, excuse me, whatever you expect to lose. Like, okay, I expect to lose 1 each quarter or 2 each quarter, whatever that may be. These could, of course, be much larger numbers. Similarly, you get to forecast how many people you expect to add. These are new hires that can include it does include backfill. So if you lose, you can forecast basically, I plan to lose somebody. I also plan to, hire somebody else. So these are independent decisions. Who do you think you will lose, and who do you think you will hire? And they net out to all of your changes in the team. So it's basically sitting team by team. Within a team, this could also be level by level. So this could be, or segment by segment. It could be HR business partners, talent acquisition, learning and development as different teams. And then we can basically have adds and subtracts. All of this nets out to the top section. So the top section here is basically adding, what did we have the prior period? What did we lose? And what did we gain? So if we look at it in a period that's changing, for example, what did we have in the prior period? What did we lose, which was nothing in this case? And what did we gain? So we can go step by step and forecast that. Again, this is better for higher level forecasting. So this is simply headcount numbers. And then how do we translate this to cost? From a cost perspective on the right-hand side, we have what were our actual costs for the last quarter. So October, November, December, this would need to come from finance or from one of your systems, Gusto, Workday, et cetera. So what was our total? And this is again, sticking with total salaries. What were our total salaries? On the left-hand side, there's a calculation here that calculates what does that imply as an average salary in December. So it takes your December salary divided by your December number of people to get to context for where you start off today. And then you have the opportunity to put in what you think will be going forward. So this coming year, 2023, if you believe there will be any increase, you can plug that increase in here, or you could make the whole thing 0 and it'll be the exact same comp as before. And then what you also have the flexibility to do is forecast the comp of these adds and subtracts. So for example, you may have a certain, let's say you're doing this at the team level, like you're doing the HR forecast and you've got HR business partners, learning and development, talent acquisition. You could say, look, our HR business partner team today makes on average X, but that includes the team leader. And I think we're going to add some more junior people. So when I go down here and put HR business partner and put the adds, I can put a different average salary. So you are not wedded to just using that one average salary. You have the flexibility to put an average salary for anyone you're adding, also an average salary for anyone that you expect may leave at that team level. All of that rolls up over here. So total compensation is basically adding up whatever the compensation was before plus these changes. And these changes are coming off of that average that you have down here. So we have the ability to plug in different amounts. And our headcount translates to a total cost forecast. Any questions on this detailed version of the template? Basically, we just need to plug in what is our team and comp today, and then what changes do we expect to take place? The rest rolls up from there. This can be done at an overall team level. I think it's very helpful to get a quick swag. You're sitting, you're planning out the org overall, and you haven't done your bottoms up build yet, but we're, all of a sudden, like, the world has changed and the board wants a view of, okay, where are we going to be? And we only have a week and we don't have a lot of time to turn this around. This is a tool that you can use to sit with your, with the CFO and with the CEO and say, okay, let's play around. What might this look like? And then boom, have this update right in front of you. At some level, you'll still want to do the bottoms up build, but this is good for a high level. I think it's also a tool for business unit leaders to plan out their teams to some degree. Okay. Where does this roll up? This rolls up as a summary on the next tab. So essentially summarizing by quarter, and we've got total salaries, we've got total headcount, so salaries and headcount. And then over here, we're bridging. So where did we start or really end last year? And where are we ending this coming, the forecast year? This piece is all of our changes in salaries. So if salaries went up or down, this piece is basically whoever we lost or we're forecasting to lose. And then this piece is essentially new hires that we're forecasting to hire. And then this nets everything together. Same concept down here. This is on, or like in terms of bridging or seeing how we've evolved throughout the year. This is basically saying how many people did we start with, and then each quarter, how many did we add or lose, or how many are we forecasting to add or lose, and then where are we ending? Okay. And then this is more the where did we end last year, what changed on the team, and where are we ending this coming year. If we want to get that much more detailed, we could look at attrition by quarter and new hires by quarter. So most likely you would spend a majority of the time looking at these overall numbers. And I didn't recalculate all the same ratios on this page just to keep it simple and clean, but we absolutely could do all the same ratios from the other tab on this page if this is more the level that you want to forecast at. So looking at revenue per person, per month, or per quarter, per year, looking at cost as a percentage of any revenue forecast and so on. Okay. And then one last thing that I wanted to talk about, and then we'll open it up to more general conversation. And I think there's lots and lots. This is an amazing group of people actually that's joined together today. And so I want to save some time, for people to share some of their own, best practices or what's worked well for them. And we can have a little bit of an exchange of ideas on that. Where we are on this last tab is, I think in today's environment, unfortunately, a lot of teams are being asked to say, okay, let's take another look at the plan. Where can we cut, or what, let's say we need to get to X place. Like we need to get to where our run rate annual salaries are no more than $5 million, for example. What this is meant to do as a tool is basically say, and it's meant to be relatively simple, but just to make the math a little bit easier is to say, okay, what did we have in terms of salaries today? So this is basically our last monthly salary times 12 would be kind of our annual run rate salaries. This should probably be blue. In general, blue is stuff you can plug in. So this is what we would plug in. This is how many people are on each team. Again, this is before we make any changes. And then we've got average salary per year and per month. What this is designed to let us do is basically plug in however many changes you think you need to make per team. This could be ads, but in this case, it's planned out as like, okay, if we need to make cuts, how are things going to look? And this essentially lets you plug in those cuts. This is still at a pretty high level saying, okay, by team, we're just assuming we're cutting at the average salary, and to get like a quick swag. Post those changes. How many people do you have? What is your salary going to be? And like again, using the average. And then what does that translate to in terms of your run rate? So you can see, okay, we've gone from 6 million run rate to 5 million run rate. Is that sufficient? And then this is also with, has the optional with fringe. So whatever that additional payroll and healthcare, other benefits cost is. So this is just meant to be a simple calculator, but to run rough math of, okay, if we cut the sales team by 20%, or we cut the engineering team by 30%, what does that look like in terms of what we're spending and how many people are on the team? Does that feel right, at least at a high level? Then there has to be more detailed conversations. How do we actually get there? And does the math all work when we get, go person by person? And how much severance do we need to plan for? And does that change the math? And all those kinds of more detailed considerations. But this is just like a quick calculator to do rough math. Okay. Those are basically the templates that I wanted to walk through and talk about. And now I'll shift gears and would love to just get any reactions you guys have. Is this helpful, not helpful? What do you think? There's of course limitations to each of these. Where do we feel like we'll face maybe limitations or frustrations, maybe trying to put this into practice? Pretty open. There's lots of smart people on this call. So would love to guys that feel like discussing. I would say today's class was really just walking through some ideas around what we've seen work for folks. It's not an Excel class today of like, okay, how would you go perfectly use this? Although we've tried to build the template to be usable and not too easy to break. But we definitely have classes that we teach, and we're always happy to like talk individually in terms of what might make sense for you or your team to actually say, okay, how do I go from I've got messy Gusto data or messy ADP data. I've got like, all these teams that want to look at things in different ways. And I saw the template you showed me, but like, how do I can't quite get there on my own. Like, that's sort of why I started Recalc, was because if you start off your career in banking or consulting or private equity, it's like the one thing that's drilled into you is being able to move data around in Excel really easily, be able to like build forecasts and templates. And when I went out into the real world, so to speak, it was leading teams. I felt like a lot of our time we were trying to organize information like this so we could have the hard decision-making conversations. What do we actually do about the team? But we were spending so much time trying to organize the data. We were just like fighting an uphill battle. And so actually on that note, before, because I know some people will have to drop probably before the end of the hour, I will show one thing, which is, what we're up to beyond stuff like this is, and I know some of you guys have been to our classes, is we teach spreadsheet classes. My belief is really anyone can learn to at least be less hating a spreadsheet. It may not be your favorite thing in the world, but I do think it's a lot easier. It's just not taught out there in the world much. So like, it's not really taught in school. It's not really taught as you come up through your career, unless you started in banking or consulting or private equity, something like that. But my personal belief is it's eminently learnable. And so we try to fit into people's lives and teach like very digestible courses, all live, all taught by me or by co-instructors also on the call here. Suzanne, you can wave, Suzanne. And we teach spreadsheet fundamentals, which is designed for beginners. We don't assume any prior knowledge, but we do move through a lot of content so that you come out of it with those skills. And then our business analysis is a course it's basically at the level we're talking about today in terms of how would you build a template like that? How would you change labels and get things to update? How would you aggregate things with a sum ifs or count ifs? Some of the things I mentioned in there for those that have seen some of that content before. And then totally separate from spreadsheet stuff, we offer some finance 101 courses. So finance fundamentals, which is, hey, I'm not a finance person, but I have to like work with finance people all the time. And I kind of like hate it because like, I just feel dumb because they're not that nice about it. So like, that's like we hear a lot. And that makes me sad because I think it's eminently learnable and hopefully not the intent of that finance person, but I totally hear where people are coming from on that. So we designed a course to say, okay, how do you read an income statement? What is on a balance sheet? What is on a cash flow? How do we talk about a cap table? Options, like, you're sitting there in HR giving out offers to people, people have questions about what does it mean that I'm getting these options? Like, how do you have the tools or the framework to understand what all this stuff, pre-money, post-money, what all this stuff means? And then we also have a more advanced forecasting and modeling curriculum for FP&A folks. So that's a little bit about what we do. And then excitingly, we also have 2 new tracks launching soon. So PowerPoint/Google Slides based on a bunch of customer requests, and then SQL. So a lot of folks, have too much data for Excel, need to manipulate it some in SQL, but don't want to go become programmers, but still want to be able to access their own data. That's what the SQL course is all about. So it's actually called SQL for Excel users. So if you feel like you are more in that Excel camp, but wish you could be more in SQL camp, then it could be a good course from that perspective. So with all of this stuff, we would love to chat. We're always happy to jump on a call and figure out what makes the most sense for you or your team.